Leadership isn't just about what you do, it's about who you are. And as leaders, we need to start thinking a little bit deeper about who are we? Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we behave the way that we do as leaders? Why do we make the choices that we make? Many times, those choices come from a really small person from back in the day, and that's our inner child. We don't really make the connection often that our behavior at work as leaders is directly connected to who we were when we were little, the experiences that we had when we were little James, or in your case, little put your name on it. But that's where many of our issues come from as leaders. And in order for us to be able to move forward, just like Beyonce said, you got to find your way back. Let's talk about the inner child for a couple minutes. I'm not going to hold you long. Welcome to Ask Dr. Golden. One of my apprentices this week sent me an email, and it wasn't just a few questions, but it was really a reflection on the last talk that I gave with Janelle Black, which was really centered around revolutionary grief. And in particular, one of the things we talked about was in order for us to grieve and move forward, we do need to address the little people that experienced grief that we may not have realized we're still acting out some of their concerns and some of their issues. So I want to give you guys a couple things so we can move into this next phase of 2025 being strong leaders, making sure that we're able to serve not just our customers, but our teams. There are three fears that usually leaders, especially servant leaders, have that block us from being able to manifest and reach our full destinies as servant leaders, as transformational leaders, as people who are of service to this earth, to this community, to people, to our families. The first is fear of rejection. And when I think about fear of rejection, this manifests and it shows up in our workplaces today because a lot of times we have these great ideas. Now, I'm somebody, my team will tell you, I am somebody who will literally come into the office and I will say, we need to figure out a way to get Beyonce to perform at our graduation. Now, I'm dead serious. I'm not playing games. I think it's possible. And I want my team to find out a way. And while we know in reality that Beyonce is not coming out here to do a performance at a graduation for a few hundred people, it's the intentions behind what I'm doing. It's showing people that I am going to come in and I'm not fearing the rejection of what you think of my idea. That's from doing some inner child work. And I didn't just wake up and decide it was going to be that way. In order for me to get to a place where I could come in and bring ideas that are off the wall, that, hey, we might not be able to get Beyonce, but we might be able to get another singer who's local in our community that is well known. And Faith Evans might show up, or Kelly Price might show up. It was my girl, so no shade to them. But as leaders, we need to be able to bring our ideas to the table and to not feel rejected. I remember when I started to consider having to do inner child work so that I could walk into any room and not feel ashamed of my ideas and to just be bold with who I am. The first thing that I had to do was I had to go back and think about little James. And I took out my journal and I started writing. And I said, what were the rejections that I experienced when I was a child? And I started thinking about little James and how was always this creative person. And to the point where he would bring these things to class that his classmates would laugh at. And third graders are, God bless their hearts, they are beautiful human beings, but they are vicious sometimes to each other. And I remember bringing something to class that it was this incredible painting that I had worked so hard on, and it had nothing to do with what we were talking about on that day because we were supposed to be talking about science. But for me, it was an expression of who I was. It was looking for my teacher and my classmates to validate and say, James, you did something incredible. This is really great work. I was a creative mindset. I wasn't in there trying to do the experiment at that time. And yeah, I was out of line, but it was the heart behind it. And I remember feeling really rejected when people started laughing and when I got sent to that principal's office. And the important point of that is that Whether I was right or wrong, I was a third grader. And the reality is that laughter continued to manifest itself throughout my life. And I started to think about, I don't want to be that kid who comes into work as an older adult that gets laughed at for not meeting the mark, for bringing something that doesn't have anything to do with this, to the point where I started to obsess over it a little bit. And this is how we end up with these pathologies as leaders that we need to unpack. Had I not gone back and remembered and wrote about what it felt like, and to step into the body of third grade James and say, I was really embarrassed and I wish that somebody would have validated me while getting me back on track, because it would have made me feel like I was okay. Doing this work to uncover the fear of rejection is important. We've all been rejected before, and some of us continue to be rejected, and all human beings will be rejected from things. But the question becomes, how do you deal with that rejection? Where does it come from and where does it originate from? And can you go back and can you lift up that little third grader who had a great idea and who had a beautiful painting, and it just wasn't on topic at that time, but it was still beautiful. And he didn't need to be rejected. He needed to be loved. And so you love that child. And then there's difficulty trusting. This is something that I find with a lot of the leaders that I coach, is there is a huge difficulty in being able to trust people. And so we know that this is the human condition. We know that we've all experienced a loss of trust throughout our lives, and that it creates these gaps and these holes that when we show up today, we are a little less trusting of people because of our experiences. We need to be able to go back and think about what happened for our little kid self that started to erode that trust. Was it being lied to? Was it having the carpet ripped from beneath your feet when you have parents who split up or you go through a divorce? Was it losing trust that people are going to stay here in your corner because you might see them die at an early age, and you might start to think, hey, I can't handle this. Like, people are leaving. I can't trust that when you say you're always going to be there for me, that you will. Those little people have experienced things that now us big leaders are having to unpack. Because when we come into the office, the behaviors that we start doing are micromanaging. And we might not even see it, but I recently had one of my favorite apprentices. I don't have favorites, but if I did, she would be one of them. And I remember my apprentice saying, I have a hard time delegating right now because I need this to be done correctly. And it was this huge report. It was a state report and it needed to be done. It was all these pieces and data and reflections. And she had a really serious trust issue that if she delegated this, that it was not going to be done up to standard. And so part of what I had to do with her is to say, I overstand what you're talking about, because I definitely know what it means to be a leader who has little trust sometimes that things are going to get done exactly the way that we need them to get done. The issue is that it's not other people's problem. It's not the people that we're leading or supervising. It's ours. It comes from a place of a lack of trust. It's a fear of trusting others because it's vulnerable. We have to then place ourselves in the hands, place our products in the hands, place our data in the hands of people who are not us. And we have to be vulnerable to be able to say, I'm okay with the outcome of this. And that it's going to be okay for somebody else to help me. I don't have to control this whole thing. And I had to tell her, you're going to have to go back and do some inner child work. When did your little child stop losing trust in humanity? When did we start to think that people will betray us or they won't do what we ask them to do? Now, here's the reality: some people won't do what you need them to do, and those are the people that need to be fired. But in reality, we've carried this self protective, limiting behavior too long as leaders. And it's time to let it go so that our teams can grow, so that our teams can start to realize what it takes to do the work that we're talking about. And that's the power of tapping into your inner child related to the fear of trust. The one I see the most often, ironically, because when you think about leaders, you think about all of this bravado, but it's avoiding conflict. It's the fear of conflict. And this is something that I definitely have struggled with throughout my career as a leader because I've always been a compassionate person. I've never wanted to hurt people. I went through phases where I said, I'd rather bite my tongue than to cause this person harm, perceiving that if I talk to them, if I am honest with them, if I say something that could create conflict, that is going to make their life harder. And the reality is that it's the exact opposite. If we do not speak up, if we do not become okay with conflict, there are plenty of repercussions that will come from not being able to do that. In particular, I think the inner child work that we think about when it comes to conflict is what happened for our inner children that made them feel like if I speak up, I'm going to be punished. Or you might have been through a situation where you were in a household where you learned that having a voice is not okay. And I have plenty of friends. I had a wonderful growing up, and there were times when we would get popped in the mouth for doing too much. But sometimes it goes too far where we do start to think that I need to keep these things to myself. I don't want to upset my boss. I don't want to upset my team members. And so I'm just going to seethe and I'm going to be in my office hot and I am more interested in keeping the peace. And so we need to go into childhood and we need to figure out where our voice is suppressed. This is where the throat chakra comes in. And when I see people with these big blue stones here and here, I think you're doing some work on yourself. You're allowing yourself to speak up. You're encouraging yourself to name those thoughts that matter, that are important, because not only is that going to make you feel better, it's going to make you feel stronger, but the other person is actually going to learn that this is what needs to happen. We are human beings. We have a right and a responsibility to tell people the truth. It doesn't mean that you harm them intentionally, but you also are not a magician and you cannot allow yourself to think that what you say is controlling somebody else's emotions. That is a personal journey that people have to go through. And you know what? You might get upset, and that's okay because that's part of the process too. But we are going to communicate. I'm not going to be scared to say something to you. I'm going to be straight up with you, and you're going to have to deal with that. And I can also give you some resources to therapy, to coaching, to different things that can help you process that. But we are going to have this difficult conversation, and we're going to do it right now. So, never mind all the other stuff. The point of this is when we recognize, when we tie back our behaviors today to things that our children went through, our inner children went through, when we nurture our inner child, we're now nurturing our future as a leader. We're able to go back and unpack the things that happened to us. And yes, they're going to be painful when you write, when you journal, when you vlog about it, when you talk to your therapist about it. It will be painful sometimes. You are not going to want to always go back and say, let's talk about what I went through as a child. But I promise you that healing does come from it. That healing of your ability to inspire and lead as a servant leader, as a transformational leader, that will happen. And that's the most exciting thing about this. You stop leading out of fear and you start to lead with intention. You start to realize when little James is starting to come up, when you're starting to feel the bodily sensations as a leader, like something is being triggered in my little guy. You become the kind of leader who is aware, who is self aware, who is compassionate, and who is open to talking about the things that need to be said, whose voice is not going to be silenced no matter what. And like Michael Jackson said, we can say it in love. We don't have to go off on people, but we do need to speak up. We do need to say what's right. We do need to have moral conviction, and we need to be ethical as leaders. And part of our ethics is speaking up. So next time you notice a challenge in your leadership, I want you to do this. Think, is this happening right now, or is this related to something that could have happened with my inner child? Is this related to something that I have experienced my whole life, like a pattern or a pathology? Healing the child within you might just be the key to unlocking your full potential as a leader. And that's what we do at Golden Global every day. We teach people how to access the very best version of themselves and their leader selves. Because we have a world that we need to heal, and we can't do it if we're carrying baggage, if we don't understand or heal from our inner child. Thank you so much for this question. It is so needed, and I hope that it inspires whoever watches this as we move into 2025. Be self aware, be courageous, be strong, and most importantly, be healed. Blessings unto you and blessings over me. I'll see you guys next week.